how will the Saints approach the NFL draft? Let's go ahead and listen to what Matt has to say. Before we get into the video, let me quickly say, the Saints should approach the draft much like I think all teams should approach the draft. I think most teams mess this up. I think most teams kind of, they look at a need and then they kind of force their draft around that. I think it's much better if you just draft the best player available. If you just fill holes, if you just stack your roster with good players. Now, if you have like the first overall pick, could be a little different, right? But for the Saints, who are picking in the 20s, there's no reason to be like, all right, we have to get a wide receiver in the first round, because you never know who's going to be there. So you're better off just saying, look, we have a lot of needs. We need linebacker help. We need defensive line help. We need wide receiver help. We need running back help. We need a lot of stuff. So let's just go ahead and focus on who are probably going to be the best available in that section, and let's take them. And then in a few years from now, hopefully, we'll have some really, really, really deep roster spots, really deep position groups. That's what the Saints should do. That should be their mindset going into it. It shouldn't be like, let's only look at Tajay Sharp. Let's only look at a running back at our position. It shouldn't be like that.
ESPN has kind of done this this feature where it's what's the best case scenario for every team in the draft. And for the Saints at 29, they kind of looked at their top two picks. What do you do at 20?
I'll tell you this right now. At 29, I've seen a lot of mocks. I love the idea of the tight ends. I've seen Michael Mayer fall down there. Dustin Kincaid, I think is the other guy's name, right, from Utah. That would be huge. Like getting a Mayer from Notre Dame, that would be sweet. I've seen some cornerback situations. I've seen some wide receiver situations. Those would be cool. Defensive line obviously is something we need, but there's no reason to reach. So I'm all in on best player available. Talent greater than need.
29 and 40, and it's add a pass rusher and find an offensive weapon. And when you look at the mock drafts, that's kind of what has been narrowed and zeroed in. The Saints in fortifying both lines of scrimmage, that really has got to be the primary objective going into the start of this draft.
No. Look, do we need that? Yes. But if we walked out of the first two rounds with one of the top two tight ends and one of the top three receivers, I'd be okay with that. If we walked out of there with one of the top three receivers and Tajay Sharp or Bijan Robinson, okay, cool, works for me. If we walk out of there with a linebacker and a defensive lineman, okay, cool, works for me. Like you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into let's solidify the line. It should strictly be, we are a team devoid of talent at a lot of positions. We are a very shallow team. We don't have a lot of depth on our roster. Let's just focus on making good picks. The only thing the Saints should be doing in that front office right now is saying we can't whiff. We cannot whiff on a pick. We cannot take someone in the first round. We can't take a left guard in the first round who ends up not being able to play. We have to get production out of these picks. That should be the theme. It shouldn't be, taking whoever just for position's sake. If we whiff on that first pick, that first round pick, that is going to be devastating. So you got to do your due diligence that whoever you're taking, the chance of failure, the chance of risk ain't there. Now you're going to say, well, James, shouldn't every team do that? Shouldn't every team take picks that they think are going to work out immediately? The answer to that's no. Some teams, some players, you can sit there and go, there's a high risk this guy can't play, i.e. Anthony Richardson. But the risk is worth it. And so some teams will take project players. Some teams will take a la Trey Lance. Like, hey, there's a chance here. There's a serious risk here, right? Like Trey Lance was way more risky than Mac Jones. I'll tell you that. But some people thought Trey Lance had a higher upside. I'm saying that you better pick players that the risk is really, really, really low. You have to have impact players from these draft picks. They don't have to be Pro Bowlers, but you have to get production out of these picks.
You lost 4 players across your defensive front. You need to add bodies there, and not just bodies, but starting caliber players. You've signed 2 in free agency. you need to add more. And I know they said an edge rusher to replace Marcus Davenport, but I actually look at defensive end and I say, okay, you've still got.
Yeah, I think the interior defensive line is way worse than your edge.
Cam Jordan. You got Carl Granderson, who's been a productive player for you. You've got Tano Passanio. And, of course, you got Peyton Turner, a guy who used a first-round pick on 2 years ago. It's time to get something out of him, and he sounds like he's ready to be that guy, and hopefully he is. But your numbers there are okay. You don't even have numbers at defensive tackle. You have got to address that position. With
Matt is coming around here. Matt's saying some smart things. At this point, like I just said, you need bodies. You need bodies. You need production. You need numbers. You need people who are going to come in this season and play at an average level baseline. You don't need to take someone that you can develop. You don't need to take somebody that a few years down the road we'll see what happens. High ceiling. We don't need that. You got to fill slots. Get people who can play the game and who can play the game in 3 months.
Certainly one, if not two picks in this draft to fortify that interior defensive line. I'll keep saying it. I'm not going to say I don't care. I'm not super bullish on one guy at that position at 29. If we were talking about a top 5, top 10 pick, and you had a chance to get...
I agree. I'm not super bullish, as he would say, on any of those guys. In the interior defensive line, linebackers, there's not a stud outside of that top 10, I don't think, that you can really target. If you're in the top 10, yeah, it's like, how do we move up for Jalen Carter? How do we move up for Will Anderson? How do we make these moves? Sure, I'd hear that. But I will say where he's talking about the interior defensive line is basically my thought for everything. So let's say you end up taking, I'm just going to make some players up. Let's say you take Jordan Addison at 29, and then let's say you turn around and take Bijan Robinson in the second round. Okay? You do that, then you come out of the draft and you say, all right, now we have to go into free agency. Now we know what we have to do. We are targeting defensive linemen. Or who's not getting drafted? Who is an undrafted player who we think who can play? And you can target those positions. The Saints need to be flexible. The Saints need to be flexible and be ready to pivot. They need to know, like, okay, we're targeting these players at these positions. One across the board, every position. Who do we think is the best at the positions? Boom. He's available, take him. He's available, take him. All right, we ended up with a tight end and a linebacker. What do we need to do now? We need to go to free agency, defensive line, running back. We need there. That's what you got to be flexible, and you got to pivot at the position you're at.
Jalen Carter, no brainer, right? But when you're picking at 29, there's a cluster of 5 or 6 players that in any given mock draft you see them mocking that player to the Saints, one of those players to the Saints.
Yeah.
And whoever that may be, I'm gonna be good with it. If the Saints at 29 take a defensive tackle, and at 40 it's best player available. Maybe it's a running back, maybe it's a receiver, maybe it's a tight end, maybe it's an offensive lineman who falls and they get great value there. Maybe it's an edge player. I'm good. I'm gonna be good with it as long as they address interior defensive line there.
You know how, like, in a fantasy football draft, you have your players who you know are just going to be solid players, but then you have the guys who are like, oh yeah, this is my sleeper pick. This is a bit risky, but I think I'm going to get a ton of value out of this. This is my big sleeper. The Saints are at the point where they need to delete the sleepers off the list. They need to just get the tried and true guy who you know is going to give you production. They may not win you the draft. They may not win you your fantasy league, but they're going to be there. They're going to play. They're going to be productive. No problems, right? And Matt is real close. He's real close to having the right answer. He's a little stuck on this defensive lineman thing, and he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth right now, where he's saying the right things, and then he finishes it up with just take a defensive lineman. And it's like, you can't say the first part and then say only take defensive linemen in the first round. So he's almost there. Let me know in the comments below what you think, guys. Let me know, do you think we should be taking a specific player? Do you think we should have a specific guy circled, highlighted with that first pick, with that 29th overall pick? Is there someone that the Saints should have on their board and they should say him above anyone else? Or are you with me and you think it'd be better if we got a little bit more diverse, if we were a little bit more flexible, if we did a little more pivoting, and there was a few different players that we could take. Let me know in the comments below what you think, ladies and gentlemen. We're about 2 weeks away from the draft. We're ramping up our draft coverage here. One of the best times of the year.